Again, you don't know which one is
Tanks, mate, they're tanks.
So you wait for about an hour just to see a car drive past and that was it.
The biggest cavalry I've ever seen was I arrived when we banned to Greece one year, and we arrived at the airport in Athens, and we were held at the airport. Why can't we go to the hotel? We were staying at the Grand Restaurant in Athens. If you ever go to Athens, stay at that hotel. It's magnificent.
Is it near the Parliament? Not far from the
Yeah,
Parliament?
it was. And the Erdogan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, first 6 floors, he had 49 cars in his brigade, 2 ambulances, just in case they got shot. It was insane. You arrive at the hotel, every room was a 6'6" Turkish instrument, walking corridors. Small businesses and tourism. Tourism in McNamara.
Honourable members, the Deputy Speaker.
Are there any constituency statements from honourable members? I call the member for Richmond. Oh, sorry, McNamara.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. When you come to Melbourne, you come to McNamara. You come to our iconic places and businesses and destinations to experience the culture and the wonders of Melbourne. But during this pandemic, it has been devastating. It has been devastating for our cultural institutions, it's been devastating for our local businesses, and it's been devastating for our events sector that has helped power our local economy all the way from St Kilda all the way up to South Bank. But that's about to change, and there is hope on the horizon. There is hope for our small businesses, and there is hope for our institutions that are desperate to welcome people back in through their doors. And unfortunately, Deputy Speaker, there have been businesses that haven't made it through the pandemic. And if you walk across Ackland Street in St Kilda, just near where my office is, you see the remnants of businesses that didn't make it throughout this pandemic. And it has been really difficult for those businesses and for those staff to experience the loss of something that they work so hard to maintain. But the good news is that there is hope on the horizon and that Melbourne is roaring back to life. Another sector that I wanted to mention was obviously our travel agents. These are small businesses who have had the worst 2 years, hopefully they'll ever have to experience. Our travel agents are made up primarily by working women who, because of the really flexible hours, because of the nature of the work, it's a really fantastic job and fantastic business for working women. And they have, our travel agents, over the course of this pandemic, had to keep working, but for no revenue. In fact, they have been working to give refunds to their customers and working to keep all of their loyalty and their customers on side without having any reward for themselves. And I really wish nothing but a bumper season for our local travel agents. I hope that they are able to recover some of the damages that they have felt over the last few years, and I really wish that people not only travel from Melbourne to wherever they want to go via our travel agents, but they come to Melbourne and they come and visit our wonderful institutions, from the Arts Centre all the way down to the Palais Theatre and all of the wonderful local small and independent theatre companies in between. The live music will be roaring back to life this summer, and we couldn't be more excited. So here's to a bumper season, here's to a summer of recovery, here's to some certainty for our small businesses, and here's to McNamara businesses and small businesses roaring back to life over this summer.
Order, and I call the member for Nichols.
I'd just like to congratulate the previous speaker on sticking up for travel agents. They've gone through a horrible time. But my constituency statement would like to just explain how exciting it is to be in Shepparton and the Goulburn Valley at the moment. It's, again, very excited about coming out of COVID, very excited to see some of the freedoms that have been given to those in Melbourne, and obviously many Melburnians are looking forward to their venturing into the regions over this long weekend in Victoria. Those visitors that are coming to Nichols over the coming days and months will have the opportunity to experience a lot of first times, because we've nearly got, due to some of the significant contributions by the federal government, we are going to see the Shepparton Art Museum officially open. This has been a $15 million contribution towards a $50 million art museum, and this is going to have become one of the best regional art galleries in Australia. And the region is very, very excited about having that building completed. Also, at the same time, about 4 kilometres away, we have the Museum of Vehicle Evolution being completed. And again, the federal government was a major stakeholder in the building of the Vehicle Evolution Museum. So we've contributed $2.5 million to this museum, and it will highlight an amazing array of trucks, historical trucks, brand new trucks, also vehicles, bicycles, motorbikes, and an incredible women's fashion collection is also on display. It's a 10,000 square metre facility, and it will be quite unique in Australia. And at the same time, work is just commencing on the Shepparton Maud Street Mall, which is going to be a $17 million overhaul, where this mall about 40 years ago was where vehicles were stopped and pedestrians had right-of-way. And for one of the first cities in Australia is actually going to reverse that. We're going to have slow-moving traffic put back into the Maud Street Mall, a $17 million investment all up, and the federal government has contributed over $8 million for that project. It will be a game changer, and we are looking forward to seeing how that goes into the future. Also completing right now is the Chukamoama Bridge. This is a bridge that's been talked about for 55 years, but over the last 4 or 5 years we've actually been building this $340 million bridge, and it is also nearing completion. The two ends have finally met over the mighty Murray River, and it is certainly fantastic that this project will be getting completed in the coming months. It certainly is an exciting time to be in the Goulburn Valley and Shepparton, and I want to thank the government for all the investments that they've put into the Goulburn Valley and Shepparton.
And I call the member for Barton.
I rise today to congratulate the citizens of Barton for their combined community support during the past 19 months. Importantly, I would like to record that COVID vaccination rates continue to rise in Barton. As of last Monday, 87% of all eligible Barton residents had had their first dose, and 80.9% of eligible residents had had their second dose, an increase of 3.1% from last week. Well done to Barton. We are blessed in Barton with the many community organisations that have been working tirelessly since the start of COVID in March last year to assist their clients. At a recent Zoom meeting, we shared their lockdown experiences of keeping clients engaged, caring for mental health, and generally keeping people supplied with daily necessities. Sunnyfield Disability Services, Three Bridges, Bayside Anglican Church, and Kaz spoke about how they were delivering in-home care to many of their clients, as well as online program focused on their clients' mental well-being. The local scouts have collected masks and sent them out to Wilcannia, and the Kingsgrove RSL are in constant touch with their veterans and widows. The Cogra Storehouse and Meals on Wheels advised that their food distribution programs were running well despite lockdown restrictions. Settlement Services International spoke about how they'd been working to inform clients in their own languages about the importance of being vaccinated. All organisations commented on how their workers and helpers had also been caring for each other. To each of these wonderful workers, who are mainly volunteers, I say thank you for a job well done and for continuing to support the people of Barton. I'd like to give a shout out to all Barton students from kindergarten to university for managing for most of this year with online lessons along with other people across the country. I particularly want to recognise the Year 12 students and the teachers. St George and Bexley Chambers of Commerce sadly reported that some small businesses had gone out of business, and we hope this situation will improve. I cannot finish without saying a thank you to all the dedicated essential workers in Barton, especially those at St George Hospital, doctors, nurses, everyone working in the health sector. We owe you so much for your continuing care in our community. Well done to Barton for your great community spirit during these difficult times, and especially a thank you to the community organisations.
Order.
Well said.
We'll see whether yours is. I call the member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. The word legend is one that is often used and branded about, especially when referring to our sporting heroes. But what really makes a sporting legend? Passion, dedication, success? Well, if that's the criteria, then Cairns Paralympic athlete Grant Scooter Patterson has certainly earned the title. Scooter, as he's commonly known, recently competed in the pool in the Tokyo Olympics, where he literally had the whole city cheering him on. Scooter, who competed in 5 events, won a silver medal in the 50-metre breaststroke and a bronze in the 150-metre medley, his first Paralympic medal since taking up competitive swimming in 2009. His breathtaking swim in the 50-metre breaststroke final was truly inspirational. Scooter's performance in Tokyo certainly and rightfully etched his name in Australian sporting folklore. Deputy Speaker, you wouldn't be hard-pressed to find a more down-to-earth person and sporting ambassador than Scooter Patterson. Scooter's zest for life and love for life, combined with a good old-fashioned dose of Aussie larrikin humour, made him a toast of the Games. Aussies and people from all across the world couldn't get enough of a guy on a scooter from Cairns. Scooter, in his own unique way, lifted our spirits. He gave us that little something that I think we needed and has been missing now for the past 18 months. He certainly made us smile. On Scooter's return to Australia, plans were well and truly underway to ensure that we as a community could give back to someone who's given us so much. Cairns Regional Council organised the ultimate honour last month when Scooter was presented the keys to the city. The event on a sun-soaked afternoon in the Brook Memorial Pool was attended by more than 500 people, including 4-time Olympian Dawn Fraser. I thought it would be fitting to leave the final words to Scooter, who told the Cairns Post, "With what I have done in Tokyo and in all my future adventures, I hope to inspire and motivate everyone here today and continue to inspire and motivate everyone in Cairns, Australia and the world." Can I say, Mr Deputy Speaker, from my perspective and from everybody else that knows Scooter, and I'll say this directly to Scooter, I can safely say, mate, you've certainly done that and more in relation to inspiring in more ways than you can actually imagine. Congratulations on a job absolutely well done, and I look forward to you competing in future. You are up there on a pedestal. You are an inspiration to each and every one of us. Thank you, Scooter.
Order. I call the member for McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, it's been a tough year in Western Sydney, and Western Sydney has responded with toughness. The New South Wales Liberal government was addicted to creating 2 Sydneys. We had a curfew, we had helicopters flying over our houses 5 or 6 times a day, we had very harsh restrictions which impacted on our economy. But what I want to focus on is how our community responded. Our community responded with toughness and with compassion. And I want to thank our frontline health workers. I want to thank the vaccination teams, particularly I want to thank Claire and Christy and Raj at the Prewood Vaccination Hub. They went for weeks without seeing their families. One of our vaccination blitz Sundays was Father's Day. They did not, for one moment, not turn up at work, and they vaccinated thousands of people. I want to thank our testing teams. I've come to know them very well. I've come to know the testing team at Rossford Oval very well, given I get tested every 3 days. We've now become old friends, Mr Deputy Speaker, right across the McMahon community, the testing teams, at some points 24/7, always testing with a smile. It's not the most pleasant thing to go through, particularly those of us who've had to go through it every 3 or 4 days. but the friendly faces of the testing teams have made it a bit easier. But I want to thank in particular the volunteers. These are the unsung heroes of this crisis. From the Rural Fire Service, and we think of the Rural Fire Service about fires, but the Rural Fire Service made the vaccination hubs work. Volunteering, managing the crowds, providing the water, the Rural Fire Services from all across Western Sydney, St John Ambulance. Again, the vaccination hubs, the testing clinics in my community, the Fairfield and Granville divisions, the Granville divisions at the food hamper canteens every Sunday. Our multicultural community, Turbans for Australia, Amar Singh, what an amazing effort. We've all been out there packing hampers with them, the trucks and the minivans taking food deliveries. When Amar rang me and said, does anybody need help? And I said, yes, the Assyrian retirement village in Fairfield is doing it tough. The older villagers don't want to go to the shops in this environment. The next day, in comes a minivan, Turbans for Australia, a Sikh community dropping off hampers to a Orthodox Christian retirement village. The Hindu Council, Hindu Benevolent Fund, every Sunday a canteen at Wentworthville. And I want to particularly mention Oz Harvest. Julia Finn, the State Member for Granville, Glenn Elmore and I spend every Thursday, when Parliament's not sitting, at the Oz Harvest hamper canteen in Granville. We normally give out around 1,000 hampers a day, which just shows the need. Susanna, our manager, our boss at the Granville Hamper Hub, Oz Harvest, keeps us on the straight and narrow. We have a very efficient operation, Mr Deputy Speaker, and we get the hampers out to those who need it. And to all the volunteers at Oz Harvest, too many to mention by name, but we've become good friends. We have a great atmosphere as we prepare the hampers and get them out the door. But Man Cave and Man Cave Support Unit, charities right across Western Sydney have responded magnificently. It has brought out the best in our community.
Order. And I call the member for Cowper.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Well, I would like to recognise the 70th anniversary of a very well-known business in the Macleay Valley. On the October long weekend, CP Ball Butchery in South West Rocks celebrated 70 years in business on the mighty Macleay. In 1951, Charles Parnell Ball purchased the butchery at 13 Paragon Avenue, South West Rocks, and that's when a 14-year-old named Colin Ball left school to take up butchering and learn the art of butchering and slaughtering to supply and sell their own meats from their grazing property known as Longreach, Kinchela. This was the start of the original paddock to plate. Over the 70 years, Ball's Butchery, as it's affectionately known by locals and tourists, opened another shop in Gladstone, New South Wales, with Colin in charge, supplying the local Macleay area as well as South West Rocks with quality meat products. By 1974, Colin moved from Gladstone to Belgrave Street, Kempsey, to service the whole of the Macleay. And this was a masterstroke for the business, as was a brand new abattoir built at Longreach, which enabled the business to grow and employ many more people and families. And in time, two of Colin's sons, Graham and Jeffrey, entered the business in 1991 to learn the art of meat processing and running the business from their father, Colin. And a lot has changed over the 70 years, as Colin can testify with, saying no more sawdust on the floors, and now to a modern-day equipment and processing. In 2016, Ball's Butchery made a decision to enter the seafood trade and built a modern-day oyster processing room at South West Rocks and developed the business even further with ocean to plate. This was a first, with meat and seafood sold and processed under the one roof. CP Ball Butchery and Seafoods has received many awards over the 70 years, with Sausage Kings and and Burger Kings awards from the Meat Industry Council, but the biggest achievement was when Colin was awarded in 2014 50 years membership from the AMIC and the oldest member. 2021 sees Ball's Butchery celebrate a major milestone, and at 84 years old, Colin is still the managing director of the business and is still very active. On a sadder note, Deputy Speaker, on the 24th of August this year, the Ball family's backbone and Colin's wife, Pamela, lost her battle with cancer, aged 79. Pamela was a beautiful person and she will be deeply missed. Colin and Pam were married for 58 years. With the business in good hands, with Graham and Jeff at the helm, Ball's Butchery and Seafood South West Rocks will continue to supply only the best meats and seafoods to the Macleay region for many, many years to come. Well done, boys.
Order, and I call the member for Richmond.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to speak on the incompetence and mismanagement of both the Morrison government and the New South Wales Liberal National Government in relation to tackling the pandemic, and how this has severely impacted the people of the New South Wales North Coast. It's only really been the last month that enough vaccines have actually arrived in our region that people can get properly vaccinated. Prior to this, many people were waiting weeks or months for even an appointment. The fact is, our community would have been fully vaccinated sooner, but we were not given enough vaccines. And I've always strongly encouraged everyone to get vaccinated. It's the only way out of this pandemic, for your own health, for your family, for our community, to support our local businesses and supporting local jobs. But, Deputy Speaker, this ongoing incompetence and mismanagement by both the federal and state governments has really shown it to the people in regional New South Wales that we are the forgotten people. That is how we are treated by both these governments. Firstly, to the Prime Minister, he failed to get enough vaccines initially. This is a race. It was a race, and he didn't do it. And he failed to build quarantine facilities to protect us. And to the New South Wales Government, who have repeatedly shown they have no concern about regional New South Wales, whether it's the rollout or the subsequent chaotic roadmap. It's all Sydney-centric to them. In June, the New South Wales Government failed to lock down Sydney straight away when Delta struck, which meant this catastrophe quickly spread throughout the state to the regions. Then they shamefully redirected our very limited supplies of Pfizer to Sydney. The New South Wales Government then failed to give us a ring of steel on the North Coast to protect our community. This would have stopped people from lockdown areas coming into our region, and it would have meant easier access to Queensland, but they rejected that idea. And then on top of that, the New South Wales Government's weak rules still allowed people from Sydney to easily come to our region whilst we were still denied access to enough vaccines. And throughout this time, we saw complete incompetence from North Coast Nationals MP Jeff Provis and his Sydney-centric government. Next, we had their chaotic and reckless roadmap, a roadmap based purely on statewide vaccination rates, and it continues to take into consideration the lack of supply of vaccines to the North Coast. This has resulted in complete chaos, where so many people are unable to access services and businesses, so many staff are unable to work, so many businesses cannot open, and many of our outstanding local businesses have been devastated due to this gross mismanagement because we didn't get enough vaccines supplied to us early on. So now, when we're looking at these very important booster shots, and we know they're coming soon, my message is very clear to the federal and state governments: do not leave the regions behind. And the same applies for those important vaccines for the under-12s when they're available. The fact is, the rolling incompetence, mismanagement and chaos of the Liberals and Nationals continues to place lives, jobs and businesses at risk on the New South Wales North Coast. Our community will not forget this, how the National Party betrayed us.
Order. And I call the member for Moore.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The pathway to net zero emissions by 2050 must be undertaken in a measured and prudent way in order to sustain the continued growth of the Australian economy, keep the cost of living under control for my constituents, and ensure that our nation remains competitive in international markets. Western Australia is a highly productive state with agriculture, resources and energy contributing heavily to the national economy. Many of my constituents are employed in the mining and construction industries. Many are fly-in, fly-out workers, tradespersons, contractors and small business owners. It is incumbent on our government to ensure that their standard of living is not negatively affected by international treaties which increase the cost of production. We must protect the jobs and livelihoods of Australian workers and farmers, particularly those living in rural and regional areas, by ensuring that our policies do not have an adverse effect on productivity or the cost of production. Access by industry and households to affordable and reliable baseload power is essential to avoid supply interruptions. It is important to ensure that all nations meet their international emissions commitments, and this must be enforceable, particularly among the populous developing nations, which are large emitters such as India and China. Australia, acting on its own, will have a negligible effect on global emissions. Where the transition to renewable sources of energy is not economically viable or reliable in the short term, the use of transitional fuels such as liquefied natural gas must be considered in the interim as technologies evolve. Studies indicate that the viable use of fuels such as ammonia and hydrogen will still not be viable for more than a decade. A commitment to ambitious emissions targets necessitates a national debate on the use of nuclear energy as an economical, low-emissions alternative energy source to carbonised fossil fuels. Only a coalition government will ensure that the transition to achieving low emissions is implemented in an economically responsible manner using transitional fuels, new technology, and it is done in a financially viable way to protect our national economy and the living standards of Australians. In my electorate, advanced research is being undertaken into renewable energy at the School of Engineering at Edith Cowan University. On a recent visit, I viewed studies into wind turbines and solar inverters to improve the efficiency and reduce the cost of renewable energy to consumers and industry. Thank you.
Order. And I call the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Hawkesbury Heights in the Blue Mountains has no safe footpath to walk or ride the 4 kilometres to the local high school, the primary school, the shops, or even to the local lookout and early learning centre. Kids, elderly people, mums with prams all have to use the rough bush terrain on the edge of a very busy arterial road. There's been huge community demand for something to be done about this stretch of road for at least a decade for pedestrians and cyclists, and the increase in traffic volume over the years means it's becoming even more dangerous. In 2016, I stood with local residents and Senator Doug Cameron announcing that a Labor government would fund a much-needed shared pedestrian and cycle path to connect Hawkesbury Heights and Winmalee, one of many upgrades needed for this road. In 2019, Labor again listened to the community and committed to funding if elected to government. Well, we lost, and the people who face the consequences of that loss are the Hawkesbury Heights community. After 9 years of the Liberals in Canberra and more than 10 years of them in New South Wales, they've done nothing. There are still mums pushing prams over rocks to the shops and kids walking beside a busy road. Will this be like so many other issues in my electorate? Headspace in the Hawkesbury, mobile phone towers, and we'll just see the Liberals wait until an election's in the air to throw out a promise that you can't trust them to keep. Deputy Speaker, we can't say thank you enough to frontline workers who've seen us through, hopefully, the worst of the pandemic. Whether it's the people at shop counters and restocking shelves, or those who care for others, aged care workers, vaccinators and testers, nurses and hospital staff, GP teams, childcare workers, disability workers, emergency services. While many of us have been limiting our contact with others, their roles demand that they be available and exposed. You might not know that police have been checking on COVID-positive people in care at home, taking them food parcels from our local food relief agencies, where community workers and volunteers have continued to serve an increasingly hungry community. There are people who've worried, these are the people who've worried about whether they're taking COVID home to their families. These are the people who've worried whether they're taking COVID to work, where their patients or clients are vulnerable. These are the people who should already have had access to rapid antigen self-testing so that they could be more confident that the lengths they go to protect themselves and others as they do their essential work are effective. As the restrictions lift, it doesn't necessarily mean that the pressures for these people lift. For teachers, the pressures have grown. So, to all these people, on behalf of the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury, and I think from this entire parliament, I want to say thank you.
The member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to recognise Her Majesty the Queen and her 70 years of service, as it will reach that milestone next year. And I wouldn't by any stretch of the imagination describe myself as a staunch monarchist, Deputy Speaker, but I do want to acknowledge that a Platinum Jubilee medal is being struck in the United Kingdom, which will feature a portrait of Her Majesty and a royal crest. And that medal will be made available next year to Defence Force personnel and frontline emergency services workers. And the reason I raise that, Deputy Speaker, today is I've received a letter from a Victorian constituent who wants the government, the Australian government, to consider, within the scope of the Australian Honours and Awards system, a Jubilee medal, Platinum Jubilee medal, to recognise Her Majesty's service to Australia as well. Now, issuing a Platinum Jubilee medal is regarded, obviously, as a significantly important decision and it's one that I've asked the Minister responsible to consider to gauge Australia's interest and whether it would be possible. My constituents suggest it should be made available, for example, to Australian Defence Force personnel, to police, fire and ambulance members and selected SES, Country Fire Authority and Rural Fire Service, along with some frontline medical staff involved with the response to COVID. So I think the idea has a lot of merit, and it's one that would signal a great deal of respect to Her Majesty in her 70th year of service. In the same vein, Deputy Speaker, on the topic of medals, I have previously written to the Prime Minister regarding the National Emergency Medal in relation to the Black Summer bushfires, and that was a couple of years ago, obviously. And I was very pleased to see that the government, in consultation with the Governor-General, declared the 2019-20 bushfires a nationally significant emergency for the purpose of the National Emergency Medal. And I urge people who served during that time to consider applying for a medal that is rightfully theirs. The medal, you can apply for that medal through your primary service organisation, or private citizens can also be eligible and go online and submit their application for the National Emergency Medal. Deputy Speaker, as you'd be well aware, our medallic system, our system of recognition, is an important one, and medals have to be earned and properly achieved through great deeds in our society. So, as the former Minister for Veterans Affairs, I was incredibly proud of the work we did as a government in relation to Teddy Sheehan VC. I haven't had many opportunities to speak on the record about the awarding of the VC posthumously to Teddy Sheehan, but that took a great deal of work by the Sheehan family, by Guy Barnett, a former senator in this place but also minister in Tasmania, and was due recognition for an unlikely hero. And for ordinary seaman Teddy Sheehan to receive his VC posthumously was a very long overdue recognition, and I greatly appreciate the work by the government and the Governor-General in recognising him. Thank you.
I'm sure Her Majesty will be very grateful for your remarks. I call the member for Lilly.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Yeah, may I join with the member for his statement? This weekend, our Hindu community in Lilly will be celebrating Diwali with the Festival of Lights in Banyo. Over 45,000 Queenslanders celebrate the Festival of Lights every year, coming together to create new beginnings and celebrate the triumph of light over darkness. To those celebrating Diwali this year, I hope the Festival of Light brings Lakshmi and that she finds her way into your homes and brings prosperity. But I look forward prosperity to your friends and family for the year to come. And I am sad that I can't be with you to celebrate this year because I will be in home quarantine after flying home from Parliament, but I look forward to joining you in the festivities next year. I would also like to thank the Queensland Hindu Society in Boondall for welcoming Senator Penny Wong and myself recently and sharing with us how our Australian Hindu community has been impacted during COVID-19. I would also like to share with the Parliament the concerns of President Rob, Secretary Camille and the Pinkenba Community Association, who have been battling a rezoning proposal that has the potential to dramatically alter their quality of life in their community. A developer has proposed that a block of land directly across the road from the street filled with residential properties be rezoned from a heritage-listed area to a light industrial area. The Pinkenba Community Association fully appreciates the importance of progress and development in an industrial area like Pinkenba, but they're understandably concerned about the site being rezoned to a light industrial area from what it was and literally right across the street from their homes. I want to throw my full support behind the Pinkenba community, and I call upon Councillor David McLaughlin and the Brisbane City Council to do the right thing by this close-knit community. I've door-knocked Pinkenba a couple of times now, and they're a very tight-knit group, and I know that they are a tough community who are not to be messed with. And I would also like to congratulate Michael and the Common Good and the Prince Charles Hospital community more broadly on their wildly successful Giving Day fundraiser. The Common Good raised a staggering $266,000, smashing their target of $250,000. Thank you to every single Northsider who donated to this fundraiser, which will fund a whopping 6,060 hours of additional medical research at the Prince Charles Hospital. May I take this time to thank all of the health workers based out of the Prince Charles Hospital and the Metro North Health District for the 18 months of very hard slog they have done during COVID, looking after the patients on the COVID ward, all of those who've come through the hospital, the testing centres, the vaccine clinics that we have now in places like Boondall, and I encourage all Northsiders to get vaccinated this week. There is only 3 days left before you will not have full coverage by the time that Queensland opens its borders to our family, our friends, tourists, but also to COVID, estimated to be on December 17. I encourage everybody to get vaccinated as soon as possible. I thank the House.
Order. Shub Diwali. Can I call the Minister for Veterans Affairs?
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The announcement of the Regional Banking Task Force is very welcome news, and I now call on it to visit central western New South Wales to hear and see firsthand the impact bank closures are having on our country communities. The creation of the task force is very positive. In fact, it's long overdue. I've been campaigning for months for an inquiry to be held into dwindling bank services in the bush. In our electorate this year, Deputy Speaker, the Commonwealth Bank has pulled out of Molong and Blaney. It's halved its opening hours in Oberon, Wellington and Gulgong. Before that, the Commonwealth pulled out of Portland, and it's not just the Commonwealth. The NAB has closed its doors in Canowindra and Blaney. The ANZ has pulled out of Cowra, and the list goes on and on. All of the banks are doing it. Whenever there have been bank closures, our communities have come together to fight them and find a solution to keep country banking going. In Molong, Councillor Peter Batten, along with residents Mary Mulhall and Marge Bollinger, advocated for service retention, as did the Mayor of Cabonne, Kevin Beattie, the Mayor of Blaney, Scott Ferguson. They all led campaigns to keep the branches open, but their combined voices weren't heard by the big banks. And the Cabonne Shire today is home to nearly 14,000 people in 17 towns and villages, but it no longer has a single standalone bank branch. The ATM in Molong charges people $2.50 per use. It's regularly out of order, and on many occasions the town has literally run out of cash. The cold hard truth is the big banks like to advertise what great friends they are of country communities, but far too often their words are not matched by deeds. Closing bank branches is very hard on senior Australians, Deputy Speaker, who may not be able to travel to larger centres to do their banking and may not be able to access internet banking as well. I therefore call on the task force to come to our area to talk to those most affected by branch closures, the loyal bank customers, some of whom have banked with the big banks through the generations since the days of pounds and shillings. Talk to local business owners, community groups and councils who are all left dealing with the aftermath once the banks have closed their doors. We need to shine a light on what the big banks are doing in our country communities, and we need to make sure that our local voices and our local stories are told and that they are heard.
And I call the member for Dobell.
Deputy Speaker, housing costs on the Central Coast are going through the roof, and the federal government is sitting on its hands. It's harder to buy than ever before, and it's harder to rent than ever before. The cost of rent on the Central Coast has jumped 3 times as much as it has in Sydney. In the year to September, the median rent in Sydney increased by 5.5%. On the Central Coast, the median rent jumped by 15.9%. This includes increases of 12.2% in the Entrance North, 13% in Batto Bay and 15.3% in Foresters Beach. And, as media have reported, National spokesperson for Everybody's Home, Kate Colvin, said the federal government must step in. She said, and I quote, "A ballooning number of Australians on low and middle incomes simply cannot compete for housing in the booming private sales and rental market." She goes on, "Unless the federal government steps up, homelessness services and other health and welfare services will be overwhelmed." After almost a decade in government, housing affordability has only gotten worse under this government. This is impacting thousands of people in my community. People like Angela. Angela grew up on the Central Coast, and she'd like to buy a place on the coast with her partner for their 3 kids to grow up.
Sorry to interrupt, but a division's been called in the House, and the proceedings of Federation change will be suspended until the conclusion of the division or any subsequent divisions and on resumption of the chair.
So the Federation Chamber will resume, and I call the member for Dobell in continuation.
Deputy Speaker, Angela wrote to me, and I quote, "My partner and I are very hard workers and would love to own our own home. Unfortunately, with the rising prices and COVID, this has been taken out of our hands. We are not the only hard-working Australian couple in this situation, and we need help. I understand that there is help, but it's not the help we need. We need affordable housing that middle-class workers can afford. We need to, especially in these times, be given the opportunity, with the government's help, to be in a family home. There's little in the rental market, as you know, and the rent prices are exorbitant. Our future is uncertain and unstable. With 3 children living at home, this is scary. I don't know all the answers, but I'm sure there's some out there. Deputy Speaker, as Angela knows, there is no easy fix, but it does require leadership from the federal government. And that's why I've invited Shadow Minister for Housing and Homelessness, Jason Clare, to visit the Central Coast tomorrow. I know Jason is keen to hear from Angela and others, and she's right. We need more housing that working people can afford, and Angela should have the opportunity to be in a family home. One of the most obvious things we need to do is build more affordable housing. That's why our Labor government will establish the Housing Australia Future Fund, which will build 30,000 social and affordable homes across the country. Over the first 5 years, it'll build 20,000 new social housing properties, including 4,000 homes for women and children fleeing family and domestic violence, and older women on fixed low incomes who are at risk of homelessness, and 10,000 affordable homes for the heroes of the pandemic, frontline workers like police, nurses and cleaners that kept us safe during COVID and can't live close to home. Deputy Speaker, I met with the Homelessness Interagency this month about the crisis. They told me more and more local people are struggling to get into the housing market. Renters are struggling to find permanent housing, and more people are seeking refuge in homelessness shelters. It's not good enough. Coasties deserve better. Australians deserve better.
I thank the member for Dobell, and I call the member for McKellar.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And this speech is brought to you by the member for Wright, who gave me the opportunity to stand up at this point. Oh, right, no problem. Yes, we are, aren't we? Yes. Much worse things have been said of me, Deputy Speaker. Humorists have often had fun at the hands of economists, auditors and accountants. On rare occasions, they will also throw in an actuary as well. One of my favourite jokes is that an economist is someone who sees things working in real life but doesn't believe it until he can prove it in theory. This year, the Nobel Committee reversed that joke, awarding the prize to 3 economists who sought to see if theory worked in reality. David Card, Joshua Angrist and Guido Imbens have undertaken some incredibly important work that has impacts from wage setting to immigration, media bias and prison sentences. Their breakthrough was to develop tools that isolate causal relationships. These are now the core of modern social sciences. They borrowed frameworks from science, specifically randomised control trials. If it was good enough for testing heart medicine, surely it could be good enough for economists. So now economists talk of natural experiments, difference in differences, regression discontinuity designs, and of course my favourite, Deputy Speaker, instrumental variable techniques in order to create credible identified causal relationships. That is right, economists now have credibility, or in the language of the Romantics, identification revolutions. That is why we now know that large influx of low-skilled migrants does not lower wages, but does expand economic activity, lowering both inequality, both in general and specific terms. We also know that if you want to reduce the impact of household income on education outcomes, then you need independent charter schools, which makes the last 30 years of Australian education policy disappointing. We can now prove that universal basic incomes has little positive impact on labour supply. It is my sincere and that the cost of housing is directly related to supply and not social housing and government interventions or subsidies. It is my sincere hope that over the next couple of decades that these natural experiments can reduce the impact of partisan rent-seeking in policy making, and that this parliament, for one, will be the great beneficiary of their work, such that we can focus, in the words of Galbraith, on what works. It was Churchill that once said that the truth is incontrovertible. Panic may resent it, ignorance may deride it, malice may distort it, but there it is. These 3 economists have ensured that the truth, now more than ever, is just there.
Thank you. And
I call the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, I wrote to the head of the TGA, Professor John Skerritt, and called for, based upon the latest deaths data out of the UK, that there should be an immediate suspension of the COVID vaccinations on Australian teenage males. That data shows that for the first 41 weeks of 2020 in England, last year, 2020, there were 347 deaths in the 15 to 19-year-old age group. However, this year, in the first 41 weeks, there were 450 deaths. That's an increase of 103 extra deaths this year in males aged 15 to 19 in the UK. And what is greatly concerning about that data is that for the first 16 weeks, there was no trend. The deaths in 2020 matched the deaths in 2021. They were on par. But since week 16 in the UK, we have seen an over 50% increase in deaths in young males in the 15 to 19-year-old age group. Now, what is the great concern is that that coincides exactly with the timing of the rollout of the COVID vaccines in that age group in the UK. And what is also of great concern is that we are not seeing this same increase in deaths in young females in that age group in the UK. And we know from the US data that the incidence of myocarditis and pericarditis and heart inflammation from the vaccines is heavily and overwhelmingly weighted to young boys, to males. That is exactly the data that we are seeing in the UK. If we are to apply the precautionary principle, and there may very well be other explanations for this dramatic surge in deaths in 15 to 19-year-old males in the UK, there could be many explanations. But given the coincidences and the correlation that the deaths are overwhelmingly weighted to males and not females, and giving the correlation of the increase coincides exactly with the ramp-up of the vaccines in that age group. If we are to apply the precautionary principle, we should suspend these injections in all young teenage males in Australia until an alternate explanation can be found. There may very well be an alternate explanation, but our history and tradition tells us that we must apply the precautionary principle, especially when it comes to teenagers, 15 to 19-year-olds, that have 6 or 7 decades of life ahead of them.
I call the member for Wright.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I rise to offer my most humble and sincerest condolences to Paula Gallagher, the wife, the life partner and the friend of the former Senator Alex Gallagher. Mr Speaker, this House affords us as members the opportunity to get to our feet. Whilst we did acknowledge in the House of Representatives in question time, prior to question time as a group, I want to take this time to add my comments to those in the other place that have got to their feet to acknowledge Alex's contribution in this place. Paula, I rise to offer some comfort to you in this dark days, in the times of mourning that you would be going through. To lose someone so significant in your life just must be a living hell, and it should turn us all to think about our own mortality and what we do with the time left that we each have in this place. Alex had a great affinity with the transport sector and rose to the dizzy heights of TWU president and surrounded himself with good men. And to each of those in the Senate that made a contribution, there was always a transport theme through his in their contributions. evidence of his contributions in this place. Mr. Speaker, he was a pleasure to work with in committee work. He was a keen golfer. He was someone that I enjoyed my time with immensely. He made an amazing contribution to this place, and he had a little catchphrase which was, "There is much to do." And if each of us go away knowing that we make a contribution in this place, there is still much to do. Valet, Senator Alex Gallacher.
I thank the member very much. I call the member for Eden Monaro.
Thank you. Last night I found out a much-loved cafe in Cobargo will be closing its doors for good next week. The staff and the cafe have helped the Cobargo community come together after the fires. It was that bit of normality for those people whose lives had been turned upside down by fires. But multiple lockdowns and border closures was just too much, and they couldn't keep going. And as they put it, COVID had taken its toll. My heart breaks as I see small businesses and sole traders in Eden Monaro whose once profitable, successful businesses are now struggling every day trying to make a living. Many businesses in Eden Monaro are like this cafe. They've been hanging on by a thread. There are businesses that for different reasons were unable to access government assistance, but even those that have received assistance are still just trying to get by. And I worry that there will be more business owners who are tired and are giving up the fight. The Australian snow industry is on the brink, which means whilst the rest of the country is getting back to normal, businesses and families in the snowy mountains are facing more uncertainty. The snow industry has missed 2 seasons of trade as a result of COVID lockdowns. And with the snow gone, businesses will need to wait at least another 6 months until they can start to recoup some of their losses. The snow industry usually contributes about $2 billion each year to Australia's economy. Australia's alpine regions are threatened now with some 20,000 job losses. The federal and New South Wales governments need to work together. They need to urgently establish a joint grant package targeted to the snow industry because this industry needs support. But I'm not holding my breath that this will happen. So in the meantime, I'm calling on our residents, our locals and our visitors to do everything they can to support our local businesses. Go local first. Shop at local grocers and butchers. Support local retail by buying Christmas presents in our towns before shopping online. And if you can, go out and enjoy time at our cafes and restaurants. Small businesses play a vital role in our economies. They keep businesses thrive, they can keep communities thriving, and they create local jobs. A shout out to everyone in Canberra who can travel at the moment. Come to our incredibly beautiful region. If you're travelling to the Bay, pop into Bungendore and check out the antique store, or grab a cuppa in Braidwood. If you're heading to Merimbula or Tathra, duck into Coombe and Nimittabel or Bemboka. If you're heading to Breadbow for the Christmas barn, spend a day at the pub. Take a day trip to Yass and stop at a winery in Murrumbateman. Use one of the mountain bike tracks in Jindabyne or Tumut, or go for a bushwalk in the Snowy Valleys. Check out and stay in our local accommodation. Buy at our shops, go out for dinner with your families, and when you return home, know that you have made a difference to our local communities.
Thank the member for Eden Monaro, and I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. We continue to see, unfortunately, bank branch closures in regional communities. The number of bank branches in regional and remote Australia reduced by almost a quarter over the 4 years to June 2021. That's a decline from around 2,500 branches to around 1,900 branches in just 4 years. We know these bank branch closures are part of a broader trend across the country, but the effects of these closures hit regional communities hardest. Bank branch closures in the regions can affect the livability of country communities, particularly for residents unable to use online services to do their banking, and that is especially older residents, Indigenous residents, those people who may not be connected online. This is why the government has established a regional banking task force which will bring together key stakeholders, including banks, Australia Post, the Local Government Association and other key stakeholders, key peak bodies. The task force will assess the impact of bank branch closures in regional communities and how banks are providing services and important delivery models. Now, they use the word transitioning, but I don't like that word because it almost indicates that they're just shut up shop and they won't be coming back. Now, I appreciate some communities they won't be, but we need to do everything we can to reinforce the message that we need these services. Over coming months, the members of the task force will bring insights and knowledge to better understand the role of technological innovation on banking services and impacts of branch closures on individuals, businesses, community organisations and regional industries. And indeed, some small businesses rely on banks to have that cash flow. They don't want to have to keep the cash on premises because that then leads to the risk of break-ins. And these and other matters are just so important with this particular issue. The task force will also seek solutions to maintain or improve banking services and accessibility where branches have been lost. Now, in my community, and all politics is local, Deputy Speaker, we've lost the Cowra branch of the ANZ, or it's closing before the end of the year. Cootamundra branch of the ANZ closed in September. The Forbes branch of the ANZ closed in May, and the ANZ also closed its Junee branch in 2016. Commonwealth had closed its Wagga Wagga Fitzmaurice Street branch this year. Lockhart branch has been closed in July, reduced opening hours for 90 regional branches, including Cootamundra, Forbes, Temora, West Wyalong. The NAB closed Ardlethan, Lockhart and Grenfell branches all in 2018, and Westpac, it closed its West Wyalong branch. And they are just some of the many branch closures right throughout regional Australia. Well, we're doing something about it. We're investigating what is happening, what we can do to improve it, and making sure we keep banks on notice to provide those important services in country communities.
Thank the member for Riverina, and I call the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, just in response to the member for Riverina's comments about major banks closing their branches, Bendigo Bank, which is based in my electorate, is expanding in regional areas and opening more and more branches. So I encourage those customers to think about banking with the truly rural bank that we have, and that's the Bendigo and Adelaide Bank. They are not leaving our regions behind at all. They are expanding, and their community bank branch model is second to none. It's where money that's invested in your local branch stays local. It's a real benefit to our regions that we have such a strong partner through Bendigo Bank. So we have bank closures as well in my part of the world, and what I say to locals is, hey, well, think about banking with our local bank, the bank that actually reinvests in our community. So go Bendigo, member for Riverina. But what I also wanted to raise today is a push on the federal government around hospital funding. You know, this is the second year of the pandemic. It is hard for our regions. We are going through the process of opening up. And I was shocked, like many, to discover that the health ministers in our state governments are so concerned about the support from the federal government that they wrote to the Minister for Health and pleaded with him to increase funding to hospitals, and urgently. I cannot believe that the government is saying, no, we've done our job, and aren't investing more in our hospitals and listening to the calls from our state governments. In my part of the world, Bendigo, we are opening up. We have high vaccination rates, but yet we are seeing people being infected, and we are, for the first time in quite a few months, now have cases at the Bendigo Hospital. They're ready, they're trained, they're ready to go, but it is expensive. If we want to make sure that we have a strong health sector with workers that aren't exhausted, that will see us through the pandemic, we need a federal government that will partner with our state governments to make sure our hospitals have the resources and the funding that they need. I am alarmed that the federal government continues to say we've done our job, like pretending that the pandemic is over. It is not. Opening up, the reality is it is quite scary. People that you know, that I know, will get sick. Children under the age of 12 still don't have access to a vaccine, and if they have underlying health issues, there could be a risk there. It's something that concerns me as a mum of 2 under 2. You know, what could happen? Nobody wants their community, their family to be infected by COVID. That's why vaccines is a good defence against this virus. However, if people do get sick, we want to have a hospital bed for them. If they get really sick, we want to have ventilators for them. That is why we need a federal government who doesn't pretend the job is done, who actually says, yep, we increased your funding last year, we're still in a pandemic this year, we're going to increase funding again.
Thank the member for Bendigo, and I call the member for Moncrieff.
Well,
Thank you, Deputy Chair, and it gives me great pleasure in this penultimate sitting to talk about a local City Heart Task Force that I put together as my response on the Gold Coast to this coronavirus pandemic. And the City Heart Task Force is made up of leaders, of lions of industry on the Gold Coast. And there are 14 key pillars across the City Heart Task Force, which I brought together to make sure that we had a cross-industry think tank on the Gold Coast to steward the way forward for jobs, skills and industry. And I have updated the House previously on the 2020 Reimagine Gold Coast Forum that I held at the Gold Coast Convention Exhibition Centre last year, in August actually, and then the following Reimagine 2.0 Forum that I held at the Island and Surfers Paradise just last month. But I just want to take the opportunity to thank the City Heart Task Force executive members for their input and their dedication to our city over this last 19 or so months. I'll start with Regional Development Australia, who of course, Estella Rodiguero, who's done so much work in the area of manufacturing. And manufacturing, of course, is worth about $7 billion to the Gold Coast and 14,500 direct jobs. So a very, very important area, and Estella's done great work with Industry 4.0 and the emerging technology-led industries on the Gold Coast. Also, the two Chambers of Commerce, I've got two fantastic presidents, Ian Kennedy and Martin Hall, of the local Chambers of Commerce that span Moncrieff, and I thank them for their input, for their feedback for the JobKeeper 1 and JobKeeper 2 wage subsidies that helped so many, 32,000 businesses across Moncrieff I have, and 10,500 of those were on JobKeeper for some period. Rob Borbidge, thank you for your dedication on behalf of Study Gold Coast and Alfred Slowgrove. Fantastic dedication that you've shown for the international education sector and letting us know how things are on the ground so that we can move that forward here in Canberra. The Property Council, construction, Matthew Schneider, 20% of jobs on the Gold Coast. Destination Gold Coast, Paul Donovan, Patricia O'Callaghan for your work in tourism, very, very important to the Gold Coast, 1 in 6 jobs in fact. The events sector, Adrian Reddings, Jan McCormick, John Howe. The arts and culture sector, Ned Pankhurst, Emeritus Professor, representing HOTA, the Home of the Arts. Chris Mills from our airport, what a great job, it's been difficult for the airport. Jeff Smith from Sports Gold Coast, the work that you do for women in sport, for that project which is moving forward in leaps and bounds on the Gold Coast as the home of women in sport. And of course, Bernie Hogan, who heads up Queensland Hotels Association. Thank you all to the City Heart Task Force members for your dedication.
In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statement has concluded, and I call the clerk.
Committee and Delegation Business Order of the Day number 1, report from the Standing Committee on Communications and the Arts, resumption of debate.
The question is that the document be noted, and I give the call to the honourable member for Moncrieff.
Well, thank you, Deputy Chair, and can I start by thanking the committee members for the way that we work together, and of course the member for Lyne, the former chair of the Communication and Arts Committee, for the work that we've done on this report and all of its 22 recommendations, now all of which are very, very important to sculpt the future of the arts and its place in our society. I can't outline all of them, so hopefully some of my colleagues here in the Federation Chamber will highlight some of those other ones that I don't touch on. But I wish to thank those who took the time to make submissions to this inquiry, to the committee, and especially mention HOTA, Home of the Arts, in my electorate for their contribution. My City Heart Task Force executive member for the arts is the chair of the Home of the Arts, Emeritus Professor Ned Pankhurst, and I thank him for his vision he has for arts and culture on the Gold Coast as the soul of our city. I also thank Karina Gerke, who is the CEO at HOTA, for her submission to the inquiry, which coloured a number of the recommendations in the final report. Firstly, they mentioned in their submission that much of the non-economic benefits of the creative industries remains anecdotal, and that there is a pressing need to better understand the reach and impact of creative industries on well-being. And in recommendations 15 and 16 of the report tabled yesterday in the other place, the committee recommended that the Commonwealth Government provide additional funding to the ABS to produce the cultural and creative satellite accounts annually,
gather and publish data on levels and type of employment, trends, revenue, geographic trends across the creative and cultural industries, and that the ABS add questions to the census which better account for the professions of those working in gig economies and across the creative and cultural industries, with recognition of paid and unpaid work. I think this will actually go a long way to understanding the true value of the arts to society, Mr Deputy Speaker, and give us a better understanding of those benefit flows from creative industries so that we have the best information to develop a national cultural plan to assess the medium and long-term needs of the sector, which of course is recommendation 1 in the report. Now, Home of the Arts also stated that the industry probably doesn't need government to help innovate. There's no surprise there. What it does need is a more stable resource base from which to operate that platform of innovation. And the committee's response to that, and so many other submissions that supported that, was in recommendation 18, which says that the Office of the Arts investigate the delivery of an Art Starter portal, just that sort of platform, Deputy Speaker, to contain information for artists and those engaged in the creative economy at all stages of their careers to enable Australia's arts industry to continue to grow and reach new audiences. And the portal should include information on, very importantly, financial literacy, including information on taxation regimes and subsidies. Now, it's well known in this place and beyond, Deputy Speaker, that before coming here I was a professional musician for some 30 years, and I still play, Deputy Speaker, mainly in my office, but also as a published author and a songwriter. And so it is a great privilege to stand in this chamber and speak to this report, and indeed to be a member of the government on this committee. Now, my own experience as a young person with a craft was that it took a long time to develop the business acumen needed to commercialise my skills and my income as a creative artist. It is complex, and it's everything from registering your business so that you can access an ABN, so that you can claim expenses on your tax, so that you can collect GST monthly and you can pay it monthly or quarterly. And in the case of COVID, having an ABN actually meant that you were eligible to receive JobKeeper payments. And not only that, but other areas such as protecting your own original song or manuscript, or indeed paintings or Indigenous artworks, which is expanded in this recommendation and further outlined in recommendation number 3. The arts are one of the greatest levellers, Deputy Speaker, and what I mean by that is that the arts level the playing field for all players. Not just those with the means to access private tuition or private schooling, but those who have a raw talent and through it can make something of themselves. We see that in sport, and this government already supports opportunities within sport through the Sporting Champions Grant Program. And one of the most satisfying things that I get to do as a local member is to write letters to young people and their parents to deliver the news that they've been successful recipient of that, and that will allow them to attend state championships or a national championship. And I'd love to be able to do exactly the same thing for young artists, Mr Deputy Speaker, as would my colleagues, on both sides. These are not large amounts of money, but they make all the difference to those families who have multiple children or a special child that has the gift of a talent and who wants to work hard. And that is essentially my own story, Deputy Speaker. I was extended an opportunity that was affordable for my family. I think it was $20 a term to hire an instrument from my high school in the 80s. I worked hard and practiced for 10,000 hours, and my work was rewarded with an international scholarship. That sent me abroad and opened up the world to me as a young 17-year-old girl. It allowed me to study my craft at university, to join a band, many bands actually, meet many brilliant role models, including the late Don Burrows, perform and travel the world, and ultimately it was the gift of music that led me to stand here in this place today. So I feel very strongly about this next recommendations, Deputy Speaker, because they are what I believe in, and that is reward for effort and equality of opportunity, Mr Deputy Speaker, the greatest of all Liberal and national values. That's why I'm so excited about recommendations number 20 and 21, that the Office of the Arts, in collaboration with the Australian Council for the Arts, establish a new local artistic champions program, like the local sporting champions program, to enable emerging Australian student artists, musicians, authors, playwrights, filmmakers, digital artists and game developers to apply for grants to support their attendance at competitions, at exhibitions, skills development courses relevant to their craft. That's providing the opportunity to dedicated young people, and that's why I stand in this place, to make sure that continues. In Recommendation 21, the committee says that the Office for the Arts establish a music access assistance program to increase active participation in school students, particularly in low socio-economic, rural and regional areas, in musical endeavours. And the Music Access Assistance Program should provide affordable access to music education opportunities, including instruments, music books and other musical equipment, just like my high school back in the 80s for $20 a term to hire a saxophone. Absolutely affordable and achievable for anybody going to a public or a private school. Very, very important. Further, in the area of education, is Recommendation 9, that the committee recommends that the Commonwealth Government consider working with tertiary education providers to develop a program of internships and cadetships which would see students and young people work in regional, small and/or community-focused galleries, libraries, archives and museums. The Commonwealth Government should also request input from the Office for the Arts, Department of Education, Skills and Employment and the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications, as well as regional arts and cultural organisations, to develop a pilot program. There are also two very symbolic recommendations, Recommendation 4 and Recommendation 12 in the report, that elevate the arts in terms of the contributions that arts make to our society. Firstly, that the word arts be added to the department title, as I just read out, omitted. And secondly, that the A from the arts be added to the STEM acronym as an additional cross-curriculum priority to make it STEAM. Both very important recommendations that the sector would welcome if implemented. To finish, I'd like to outline just some of the key support measures that our government and the Minister for Arts and Communications has put in place for this sector that is so very close to my heart. Our creative and cultural sectors have benefited through more than $10 billion in wages and cash flow support from our government during the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the analysis released by the Bureau of Communications, Arts and Regional Research. The analysis estimates that employees and businesses in cultural and creative sectors received $10.7 billion from the government to support their operations, including $8 billion in JobKeeper payments between April and December 2020 and $2.7 billion in boosting cash flow for employers' payments in early February 2021. Support Act is also mentioned in the report, and they received an additional $20 million in funding. Additionally, in the 2021-22 budget year, we're investing an additional $1 billion, including assistance in my electorate, for various events across Moncrieff. This is a very important report, sculpting a national cultural plan to ignite a post-COVID arts economy.
Member's time has expired. The question is that the document be noted, and I'll give the call to the honourable member for Dobell.
Deputy Speaker, I'd actually like to start by acknowledging the member for Moncrieff in her contribution, and also the member for Higgins in this House, who have been really important contributors to the work of this committee, and also in shaping the title. I'd like to start by acknowledging the work of the outgoing chair, the member for Lyne, who made such an important contribution to this inquiry and made sure much of the work was concluded before ably handing over to the new chair, the member for Mallee. This report recognises the role of the creative sector in Australian life and acknowledges the devastating impact that COVID-19 has had on the industry here in Australia and in communities across Australia, from big cities to regional towns in the bush. Over the past 18 months, many individuals and organisations have sometimes been forced to stop work, to wind back, and some have closed for good because of lockdown. Unfortunately, some of the support was, for some people, too late to the sector, and for some it's meant that they were left out altogether. We all know the importance that arts plays in the role in all of our lives and in Australian society. And for so many of us during lockdown, It gave us a way. I think many of us rediscovered the arts during lockdown. It was a bit of a silver lining of the experience. We escaped from the uncertainty all around us by listening to music, a streaming service, the local news, our favourite book. We found something creative to dive into that was as much as important for our mental health and well-being during this time. But unfortunately, so often, the artists or the artists that sit behind these aren't properly recognised or aren't properly remunerated in our society. People in the arts sector, before the pandemic, many people in the arts sector were already struggling, particularly those in the performing arts. And these impacts have been felt, as I said, all around Australia, including in regional communities like mine on the central coast of New South Wales. Theatres have been forced to close, sold-out shows have had to push back opening nights, and live music was brought to a halt altogether. And many of the local artists I spoke to found themselves without a way to make a living, forced to rely on government support programs like JobKeeper or JobSeeker. While welcome, wasn't what they had hoped that 2020 or 2021 would bring for them. As I said, for many people these support payments were welcome, but for some musicians, actors who rely on touring, they are left behind and some were ineligible for support altogether. People like Ben. Ben is a musician studying a Bachelor of Music at the University of Newcastle. Before COVID, he supplemented his youth allowance with live performances. He told me, "These lockdowns have made it extremely difficult for us to secure work and to keep ourselves financially stable with the limited government support available in our industry." He goes on, "When these lockdowns first came into force, our whole industry was essentially destroyed overnight. Gigs that were planned for several months down the track were all of a sudden cancelled. The effect these lockdowns have had on our industry will mean a slow recovery for the live music scene and will be felt for many years to come." I also heard from Josh. Josh is one of the founding members of JPUCA, the leading youth arts body on the Central Coast. And he said to me, "The Central Coast region has suffered a significant loss to the arts and culture sector, with over 50 projects and events cancelled just this year alone." He estimates that JPUCA has lost $170,000 in ticket sales since the beginning of the pandemic. Despite this, community arts workers and performers remain resilient and look forward to getting back on stage soon. And I think many others share Josh's optimism. Thankfully, New South Wales is now emerging from lockdown, but as Ben said, the effects of the pandemic will be felt for many years to come, and for some artists more than others. The Hunter Creative Arts Alliance, which is based just north of my electorate on the Central Coast, surveyed local artists in April this year, when the regions weren't in lockdown, and found that 11% of those respondents, 11% of respondents were without work at the time, which, as we know, is twice the unemployment rate elsewhere in the region. The report also found that 80% of young artists aged 18 to 35 expressed an increase in stress, anxiety or depression as a result of COVID-19, which we've seen across Australia, but especially in industries which have been most impacted by COVID. These findings are alarming, but I suppose not surprising, and I've no doubt that artists across the Central Coast have experienced something very similar, and many artists across Australia have as well. People in the arts feel that they've been overlooked during the pandemic, even though their industries have been some of the most hardest hit. And they need proper support to get back on their feet. As Ben and Josh have said, they're optimistic to get back on their feet, but they need the proper support in order to be able to do that. So in conclusion, while this report offers many bipartisanship recommendations, while this report has bipartisan support and was a very constructive and productive process, there are a few things that we think need to be done more to protect and elevate the arts, as the member for Moncrieff has said. We need a restored Department of the Arts to properly elevate it to the standing that it has in Australian society, to make the representations for future wage subsidies, job creation and protection for people within the industry. An insurance fund for live events would also provide certainty to performers in case of future cancellations and lockdowns. We need to fully fund the ABC, particularly in regional remote Australia and the bush, to properly support people living in those communities to get the information and advice that they need. These are all vital creative and communication services in our community, and they need our help. The government has overlooked too many people in the arts sector, particularly those living outside of big cities. And in communities like mine on the Central Coast, we need to see proper support for the arts, for the creative industries across Australia. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the member. The question is that the document be noted, and I give the call to the honourable member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise today to highlight the importance of the Australian arts sector to our economy, our community and indeed our national identity. I thank the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Communication and the Arts for their report entitled Sculpting a National Cultural Plan, Igniting a Post-COVID Economy for the Arts. I extend a special thanks to the member for Mallee for her work this year in chairing this inquiry and the member for Lyon for his work over the 2 years prior. These members and other members of the committee, and I'd like to acknowledge the member for Moncrief for her extraordinary contribution because of her personal and professional experience in the arts, alongside the Secretariat who have enthusiastically supported us and to have overseen the development of informed and specific recommendations going forward to help the arts sector and its success. Mr Deputy Speaker, support for the arts is not only a cultural imperative, it's an economic one. Australia's artistic output gives enormous value to our society, enriching our lives and creating an economic boost from domestic and international spending. The arts are a broad industry with a range of skills and talents making up a rich landscape of creative artists and workers. Engaging with Australia's creative and cultural industries and institutions has proven benefits for mental health and physical health, for social cohesion and community building, creative thinking, problem-solving skills and more. The benefits which flow from a healthy arts industry have never been needed more keenly than right now as Australia emerges from living with the COVID public health emergency. Astonishingly, Mr Deputy Speaker, the creative and cultural sector contributed $112 billion, that's 6.4% of GDP, to Australia's economy in the 2016-2017 financial year. But the value of the arts cannot be reduced to a dollar figure. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is the quality and significance of the creative work that is of importance. The arts weave into our lives each and every day, almost without us knowing it, whether it's a moving film, a beautifully designed building, or simply an elegant teacup. The arts stimulates our mind and our imagination. The arts provide everyday lives with moments of beauty. These last 2 years have resulted in a great impost on the arts. The restrictions imposed by COVID have been incredibly painful. All this at a time when we've needed the arts more than ever to help us through the crisis. In my electorate of Higgins, museums, festivals and libraries have all closed. Clubs and pubs, the thriving venues for bands, comedians and other performers remain shut. Theatres are empty. This all leaves a big gap in the lives and hearts of our community and a major impact on the bottom line of those businesses. Now, those local businesses have told me how grateful they have been for JobKeeper, for the local employees, but also for the significant investment by the Morrison government in the creative and cultural industries to help them through COVID. Mr Deputy Speaker, last year I had the opportunity to meet with A New Approach, a new independent think tank advocating for the Australian arts and culture sector. Chair of A New Approach's reference group, Mr Rupert Meyer AO, together with Program Director Kate Fielding, highlighted the unique challenges facing the arts sector, and particularly in light of the emerging COVID crisis. Following our meeting, and as a member of the Standing Committee on Communication and the Arts, I advocated for the need for an inquiry into the impacts of COVID-19 on the arts and how we as a government may ensure that our cultural identity not only thrives but prospers. Announced in August last year, the Standing Committee commenced a parliamentary inquiry into Australia's creative and cultural industries and institutions, including, but not limited to, Indigenous, regional, rural and community-based organisations. The inquiry wanted to make sure that front and centre were the grassroots organisations that feed our creative and cultural industries. The inquiry considered the direct and indirect economic benefits and employment opportunities of the creative industries, as well as the non-economic benefits of enhanced community social wellbeing and national identity. Moreover, the inquiry encouraged innovation to increase access and opportunities within the sector, and particularly cooperation between the layers of government. And we heard how the state and territory governments, local councils and the federal government all provide funding, but that sometimes it can be difficult for people in the sector to navigate who funds what, when or where. I'd like to thank so many local arts organisations who provided feedback to me during the inquiry about how COVID had affected them and their vision for the future of the arts. In particular, I'd like to thank the CEO of the Melbourne Fringe Festival, Simon Abrahams, the director of the Duldig Art Studio and its founder, Eva Duldig, Todd Patrick from Todd Patrick Studios, Mike and Nathan Harrison-Lamond from Firehouse Theatre, and Alan Ginn from Muso, which is a fantastic new company that has initiated the rise of the pub gig, aimed at revitalising the gig industry with over 100 venues that are going to put on more than 500 gigs in the post-COVID recovery. I'd like to thank all the other artists and cultural organisations who approached me and thank them for their support and very important information they provided. Mr Deputy Speaker, the committee made numerous recommendations towards ensuring that the post-COVID economy for the arts will be strong and vibrant. These 22 recommendations serve to ensure that the arts sector is held in the highest esteem and front and centre for a strong economic recovery as a future key industry within Australia. But I'd like to highlight a number of these recommendations. The first one is Recommendation 1, which is for the development of a national cultural plan to assess the medium and long-term requirements of the sector in light of the short and long-term impacts of COVID-19. Now, I believe, Mr Deputy Speaker, that this is akin to what has happened for the sports sector, with a Sports 2030 providing a national plan that brings together the different sectors and provides a strategic intent. We know that the arts sector works very well together, but I'd like to see better cooperation across the different levels of funding, federal, state and territories and local government, and I'd like to see better coordination between regional sectors and grassroots community sectors and other city-based major institutions. Recommendation 2 supports this by suggesting liaising of all levels of government together to develop and administer strategies to grow cultural and creative industries. Moreover, encouraging the Commonwealth Government to work with the Productivity Commission to remove red tape barring all levels of government from enacting artistic programs. Recommendation 3 is a very important recommendation because it seeks to create a national centre of Indigenous culture and arts of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, ensuring that Indigenous communities and bodies are represented in this way. I'd also like to mention the creation of an app that contains information regarding current artistic and cultural events in consultation with peak tourism and government bodies. We all know how helpful it can be to have an easy entry point for people to find this information. And in fact, there's a plethora and flourishment of these sorts of apps that are becoming much easier for people to access information, and I really encourage this recommendation. There are two more that I particularly like in our set of recommendations that I'd like to note, and the first one is a local artistic champions program that will see young and up-and-coming artists, musicians, authors, filmmakers and more have access to grants to support the development of their artistic abilities, whether this is by attending competitions or undertaking further courses. Such a program would be akin to the existing and highly successful local sporting champions program, which I know every member of Parliament in this place knows, supports and cherishes. Another of the very useful and practical recommendations is the establishment of a musical access assistance program that will help see students in low socioeconomic rural and regional areas given greater access to musical studies. And certainly I have been supporting local grants in my electorate of Higgins with musical studies support as well. And lastly, I'd like to note that the recommendations include that we think that the arts in the title should be re-included in the title of Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications. That's where it belongs, and I think the sector would be very happy to see it reinstated. And I also note that we believe the government should provide a progress report delivered by December 2022 on our recommendations. So just in closing, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to say that the benefit from the creative thinking and physical activity we experience when we engage with the arts is more important now more than ever. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member. The question is that the document be noted, and I'll give the call to the honourable member for Lilley.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The north side of Brisbane and the broader Brisbane community are lucky to be home to a huge array of talented young local musicians. We've produced some massive groups like Ballpark Music and like Cub Sport from Stafford. We are home to some great up-and-coming artists like Mackenzie Grace, like Dublin Rose and like Tabitha Lee. Last Saturday, the North Side's best local artists hit the Iron Bump and Lagoon stage for the Sandgate Youth Festival. Congratulations to Duck Blue Egg, who took out the top prize, and to Councillor Jared Cassidy and his tireless team for another successful community event. The past 2 years have been particularly tough for Aussie artists and for event organisers, with COVID forcing a lot of local gigs to be cancelled. For many people, they watched 6 months' work disappear in 6 seconds. And unfortunately, we have heard a lot of rhetoric from the Morrison government over the last 2 years about how COVID has impacted the workforce, but there has been little to no regard for how COVID has impacted the jobs of our artists, our entertainers and the people that support them. The patchwork policies artists were presented with were slow, they were ill-designed and they were ill-fit for purpose. Many artists were excluded entirely from JobKeeper because of the transient nature of their work. Over 150 days after Labor first called for a real package that would actually help local artists, small artists, the Morrison government finally announced a suite of grants and loans programs. But I know that many artists felt like an afterthought, and for many it was too little too late. Our artists and entertainers are the people who chronicle the Australian story, and they deserve our thanks, our respect and our support. As we head towards 80% vaccination rates in Queensland and our lives start to get back to normal, I have 2 simple asks for Northsiders. Firstly, please get vaccinated so you can go to live shows and safely support our local artists. And secondly, once you're vaccinated, get on the group chat and start making plans. We have Harvest Rain in Stafford putting on some fantastic upcoming musicals. We have Artrageous in Sandgate with beautiful displays and exhibits. And only 3 kilometres from Lily's southern boundary at Kedron Brook, we have The Valley with live gigs every weekend. Hopefully soon we will have live shows again back at the Boondall Entertainment Centre rather than it being a max vaccination hub. And if you are keen on a night in rather than all of that, get on Netflix and watch Love on the Menu, which was proudly made in our very own Shorncliffe. Whatever your preferred choice of entertainment, now is the time to celebrate our COVID recovery success and to get back to supporting our vital local artists as they re-establish themselves in such an important industry. I thank the House.
The question is that the document be noted, and I give the call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I feel a bit exasperated rising to speak on this topic, and it's not because the committee hasn't done terrific work in pulling together this report, but it does echo the recommendations that this government has received over many years about things that could be done to make a big difference to the arts sector. And I fear that this is yet another report that they will largely ignore, cherry-picking only 1 or 2 recommendations for political expediency. Now, I say this as a past member of this committee, and I see many parallels in this report and the one that we wrote from our 2017 inquiry into the sustainability of the film and television sector, and then the 2018 inquiry into the music industry. Now, it is well known that I am a very mediocre violinist, married to a former musician with an actor daughter and a musician son, so I am very heavily invested in the arts sector personally, as is my community. The hills and plains of the Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury are alive with the sound of music and dance. Filmmakers, writers, performers, painters, sculptors, creators of all types, plus the people who make the final product a reality, the producers, the set makers, the lighting experts, the framers. The whole ecosystem that gets a creative idea out of someone's head and inspires and moves somebody else. And every dad who drops his son or daughter to ballet, every child who says, "Mum, come and see me on the stage," and she goes, every family who listens to saxophone practice, who reads Possum Magic to their grandchild, who watches Bluey, who goes to the Hawkesbury Flood Relief concert or a gig in Katoomba, or who tosses a coin into the busker in Springwood or at the Richmond Good Food Market, and or puts an Australian painting on their wall. Well, every one of those people is doing a terrific thing. You're doing it for yourselves, but you're also supporting the arts. Now, this report outlines a number of recommendations, and I'm going to touch on a few of them. One of them is, of course, that we would like to see the name arts in the department's name. Now, this is a government who claims to put some sort of value in the arts, but what has happened is that it's removed that name from the department. And I think it's a very sensible recommendation, and something I have called for previously, to reinsert the word arts into the name of the department. I know it will make it even lengthier, but it will give acknowledgement, not just to the sector per se, but to the individuals whose whose work contributes to the local economy. It is an economic contributor. It isn't a drain on our society. They actually generate income that flows through economies, whether it's at a national level or in the Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury at a local level. So I absolutely would support that recommendation. I think what's also parallels with the inquiries I've done and the reports that the committee I was part of wrote is the need for greater emphasis of music in schools. And again, I have a personal connection. My mum was a high school music teacher. My son is the musician's son is about to start studying teaching. Not that I think my mother would want him to inflict upon himself music teaching in high school, something she says is one of the hardest things you can do. However, those music teachers have inspired my son to want to go back and be part of the education system where we should be seeing more music. Music isn't just something that makes you feel good, although, hey, that is pretty important. But we know it is also great from a brain development perspective. The research on it shows enormous benefits to health and well-being as well as development. So seeing a greater emphasis of music in schools, as recommended in this report, is very welcome. There's also a recommendation that we mirror the program we have to encourage kids to be high achievers in sports and to make it possible for their families to fund those things. And that's the Local Sporting Champions program, which I know all of us would value very highly. I know it has certainly seen many of my amazing athletes and equestrians and rollerbladers go and achieve terrific things. Well, as this committee report recommends, it would be fantastic to see something that parallels that for our creative kids. The kids for whom perhaps dancing on a stage is going to be a greater sense of achievement than running a marathon. So I also really encourage the government to take up that initiative. I welcome the focus on Indigenous culture and art. We have one of the oldest cultures, well, the oldest culture, living culture in the world, and the more we can do to really showcase the incredible depth of that work, the better. I also want to turn to some of the really practical things like additional funding to digitise and preserve the National Archives. These are incredibly important things. You know, to preserve what we have a National Gallery where buckets have to go out to catch the drips from the rain when it rains because the roof has leaks. Now, our institutions deserve to be funded so that they don't have to rely on buckets to capture rainwater. There's also a recommendation that we get our kids to read more Australian, a minimum threshold of Australian books as they go through school. Well, what a great idea. When I was young, it wasn't always easy to find great Australian books, but In the 60s, we relied on lots of overseas things, but fortunately, the work that was done through the 70s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s, and then with Paul Keating's real revolution to how we do the arts, our kids have access to so many more Australian born and bred novels. Deputy Speaker, there's a couple of other issues I really would like to touch on, and one of those is to do with streaming. There's been a real boom for one sector of the arts, and that's the streaming giants during COVID, while everybody else has suffered unknown and unaccountable deprivation in their sector. The streamers have done well, and it is quoted in this report that subscriptions rates are up by more than 45%. Now, I think it's very reasonable that those streamers be asked to contribute a certain percentage of Australian content. This was also recommended in the previous report by this committee, and 10% was recommended there. I note this report backs 20%, and I think it is well overdue for the government to bite the bullet and make a serious assessment of this in terms of the impact that it will have for our Australian sector. The other very important gaps that I can see in this report, though, are around things to help this sector get back on its feet after COVID. The committee heard evidence that the overall arts labour market impact was enormous just last year, with falling by 872,000, and that's not accounting for what happened this year. What they don't have yet is an insurance scheme that will allow people putting on performances to have a backup should something happen. We hope we're through the worst, but there is no accounting for what can come going forward. And a sensible insurance scheme that would mean directors and producers can go with confidence that they can employ the people they need, they can make the commitments they need, they can book the space they need, and that if something goes wrong, it can be, there's an insurance scheme that can help cover those costs. Now, this government's done it for the film sector. I just don't see why it won't do it for the broader performing arts sector. And of course, no discussion about the arts is complete without a reminder that we need to see proper funding for the ABC, which is one of the core Australian institutions that really helps Australian culture flourish. Things that start there, that go global. Let's think of Bluey. There is not a program on the ABC that doesn't have some value to Australian culture, and that's what we should be continuing to allow them to do. And I would extend that to SBS as well. The final thing I'd like to say, Deputy Speaker, is that the gaming sector does need to be given much more credence by this government than it has been. There's been nearly 9 years actually, of just wasted time in supporting a gaming sector. We are beaten by Finland and a whole lot of other countries, Canada, who have grasped this. It's a key part of the film and television ecosystem to be supporting gaming, and I'd really urge the government to stop sitting on its laurels, to stop thinking that she'll be right, because it'll only be right if you act or if Labor gets into government.
Order. The question is that the document be noted, and I give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Joint Standing Committee on Communications and the Arts report titled Sculpting a National Cultural Plan, Igniting a Post-COVID Economy for the Arts. The arts explains who we were, who we are and who we want to be. They facilitate the exploration of human imagination, emotion and creativity. They give our life meaning. It's important to understand what the arts are. They are a very wide range of human practices of creative expression, storytelling and cultural participation. They encompass diverse and plural modes of thinking across extremely broad ranges of media, from painting, sculpture, music, literature, theatre, so many. The arts can refer to a common, popular or everyday practice, as well as sophisticated and systematic ones. Most people just don't realise that the arts are part of their day-to-day life in so many ways, from their kids' music lessons to the music they listen to the TV they watch, to the books they read. The arts are what let's be frank, got us through lockdown. More directly, as this report notes, the arts it gives a benefit to our mental and our physical health. It's our social cohesion, it's our community building, creative thinking and problem solving. Our society is richer and deeper because of the arts. And the arts community in Warringah is strong and vibrant, but they have been devastated by COVID-19. Before COVID-19, the arts contributed nearly $112 billion to our economy. That is 6.4% of GDP. More than 193,600 Australians were employed in this sector. It's disappointing we don't always hear members of the coalition actually rail and fight for those jobs the way they do for the ones they pick in the industries they like. To put it in perspective, it's more than in the finance industry, it's more than in construction, and it's 4 times more than in coal mining sector. But we don't hear about specific packages and let's stop the economy or our progress for these jobs. For every $1 million in turnover, the arts sector produces 9 jobs. This is a job-rich sector. The impact of the pandemic on this sector has been arguably harder than on any other. The arts were the first to shut down and they were the last out of restrictions. In Warringah, 6,400 people were employed in the arts sector at the height of its employment. So in January of this year, it was down to 4,800 people in the sector. That's a 23.6% drop in Warringah alone. And in April last year, only 47 to 65% of businesses were operating. That's a huge drop. Now, they've adapted, they've pivoted, they've embraced online platforms, they've discovered and embraced novel delivery mechanisms, and the report points to all of this. But the truth is the sector and the people who work in it have been profoundly impacted by the pandemic, the lockdown restrictions, and I would say the lack of love from the current government. This report sets out how Australia can have a healthy, sustainable industry that will allow Australia's industries and institutions to emerge from COVID-19 better than ever and to soar to new heights. There are a number of recommendations in the report and there won't be time to go through all of them, but I encourage everyone to go and see through the link to actually look at these recommendations. In particular, recommendation 8 is a standout. I've often spoken in this place of the need to support our screen production sector, particularly children's TV production. And I'm fortunate that in Warringah we have several producers, Cheeky Little, Kapow Pictures and Stick Pictures. They're putting out award-winning content like Bluey and Kangaroo Beach. But these producers are under threat from regulatory change in response to structural changes in the industry caused by streaming and digitisation. And the government, unfortunately, is cutting quotas and other supports. So what that does is there's no backstop. These changes will lead to major employment losses in this industry, and they could jeopardise some of the iconic content that we and other nations have enjoyed, and some of the stories our children have grown up with. The report recommends that the government introduce legislation to require streaming and video on-demand services to allocate 20% of their review on Australian content. I strongly support that recommendation, as it will allow our producers to continue to produce high-quality content. Recommendation 10, which is the National Film and Sound Archive, to deal with their issue. They protect the memories, they inform who we are today. With the advent of digitisation, there is much work that needs to be done, and they really need more assistance. We also need more opportunity. In Warringah, we've suffered from a lack of creative arts during the pandemic. Pubs have been empty, theatres are empty, everything's shut down. So we need programs to reinvigorate the sector. So I strongly support recommendation 20 to be the elevation and celebration of the arts through a new local artistic champions program, akin to the existing local sporting champions program. I think this would be very good. In Warringah, we have some fantastic projects developing. We've got the Brookvale Arts District. It's been delayed several times due to COVID, but I'm excited about the transformation that is planned for this industrial area of Brookvale in Warringah. What they have planned will really be exciting, and it will bring out so much opportunity for our local artistic community. We also have the Manly Council Chamber conversion proposal to convert it to a music hall. Following the amalgamation of the Northern Beaches Council, the historic Manly Council chambers are underutilised and there's a surplus to requirement. There is a project put forward for a proposal to convert this beautiful building, an ideal location, into a live music venue. I strongly support the idea. Its central location, it's adaptable in size, and it really will, it's an ideal venue and something that we're really lacking in Manly. It will expand possibilities for local artists and existing festivals such as the Manly Jazz Festival, which was sadly cancelled for the last 2 years due to lockdown measures. The report is important. It outlines the extent that the arts to which they were devastated by COVID-19, but importantly, it outlines how the sector responded and pivoted, how it, keeping the sector on life support with online platforms and delivery methods. But it also outlines these very important 22 recommendations, which would bring the sector back to life and ensure it really does reach the heights it should. These recommendations are so important, in particular recommendations 8, 10 and 22. They strongly support the arts, in particular for Warringah and some of the industries that we already have established. The 2 new concepts for the electorate show great promise and they have my support. And we just have to recognise arts is the lifeblood of community and culture. And we really would do well to remember that and provide our support in this place. And finally, we do need to talk about making sure that we have a strong national broadcaster. I do strongly support that there needs to be a recognition of the role the ABC plays and SBS plays in making sure there is a platform where our stories are told, that we are not Americanised, that our content is not just from overseas. We need to make sure we tell the Australian stories. We hear a lot about the curriculum in our history curriculum, and Australian history should be celebrating from the government, but yet fails to then want to actually implement policies that will ensure our artistic industries actually can create the content, can tell the stories, celebrate Australian history and culture. So I think there is a hypocritical double standard, as on a number of topics, that gets really advocated from the coalition. And so I urge the government implement the recommendations of this report, fund the ABC and SBS to ensure we have a strong national broadcaster and we can tell Australian stories.
The question is that the document be noted, and I give the call to the honourable member for Perth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. This report outlines a vision for Australia's arts sector. It was prepared in partnership with the Artists of Australia. More than 300 artists and arts organisations contributed to this report. I want to thank the arts leaders and artists who spoke to us during a pandemic that had put their sector on pause. Many of them are speaking to us when they themselves had lost their jobs or their ability to do what they loved. And they took the time to share with us those experiences so that we never again leave artists on the scrap heap when we have global economic shocks. I want to see an arts sector that is properly valued by the government. During crises, during the good, during the bad. And where we don't treat arts workers as some lesser worker. We can't let artists think that somehow their contribution to our economy is any less than the contribution of any other worker. What we heard from artists as we went around the country virtually listening to the stories of artists was people tell us just how tough it had been. One artist told us, quote, "Almost everyone I know who works in the arts has lost part or all of their work." Another told us, quote, "The government did not see fit to recognise my freelance status as worthy of JobKeeper." And that was something that we knew from the thousands of survey responses that we received throughout this inquiry was a real concern for artists, is that the government deliberately structured a wage subsidy scheme to prevent people who worked in the creative and arts sector, where people are often on short-term contracts, from being able to access that scheme. The theme of this report is about pulling together the many threads to have a new national cultural plan, something to sort of grow our nation's soul post-COVID. And everywhere you look throughout this report, it's clear that there is not enough coordination when it comes to the arts organisations, the way they interact with government, the way they interact with venues, to truly support our arts sector or get the most out of the very creative people we have here in Australia. What we also saw, and you see stated very clearly in this report, is that there is a strong link between the arts and our economic outcomes as a country. We recognise in the report, quote, "Cultural and creative activity is increasingly recognised as an important component to economic growth." That was not lost on any member of the committee in putting together this report, recognising that having a strong arts sector also gives people the urge to go out and work harder so they can get to those shows, so they can experience that art, so that they can support other artists. And the other piece that is throughout this entire report is a recognition that COVID has done long-term damage to the arts sector. It's not something where we're going to snap back, bounce back, it'll all be better next year. It did smash screen production. It smashed live music. COVID destroyed live performance across this country. We still don't have the ability for people to put together those world-class shows and put them on the road around this country. We even know that writers have found COVID a particularly difficult time. We know most writers in Australia, and we have brilliant writers, support their work as writers, as artists, by doing other paid work. And we heard a lot about that as well, the amount that people sort of give out of their own pocket and out of their own time so that they can continue to create the art and stories that we love so much. And so my one request of the government with respect to this report is to take it seriously. I do feel the government did not take the arts sector seriously in 2020. I haven't seen much evidence of improvement in 2021, but there is a strong roadmap in this report of how we get the arts sector back on its feet and have it as a big, strong, driving piece of our economy into the future. The report recommends a national cultural plan to make sure that we actually integrate across local, state and federal government and across federal government agencies to ensure there is a clear series of supports for arts organisations, big and small. It recommends the investigation of the establishment of a National Centre of Indigenous Culture and the Arts, an idea that has bubbled for a long time, recognising that we do not have enough institutions that tell parts of a story that is some 60,000 years and ongoing, not just culture of the past, but also culture of the present, of the very rich Indigenous culture and arts that we see to this very day. There is a recommendation about making sure that big international streaming companies actually make Australian content. It's not good enough for them to just take Australia's money. They actually need to put something back. We recommend in this report requiring legislation to be brought forward by the government that would require Netflix, Disney+, Amazon, all the rest, to allocate at least 20% of their local revenue on new Australian content, telling more Australian stories, Australian drama, documentary, children's content, co-productions or acquisitions of Australian content. This will build the Australian screen industry, and it will mean that we capture more of our rich Australian culture on screen. I have no problem making these international streaming companies, who are incredibly profitable, fund the next Bluey, the next Neighbours, the next Home and Away, or indeed the next Wonder Gang, which is a great West Australian production. The report also recommends placing arts at the heart of education by adding a fourth cross-curriculum priority of the arts. It recommends that there be a minimum threshold of Australian authored literary texts in the Australian curriculum, making sure that we have Australian texts throughout schooling from the early years through to years 11 and 12. We recommend making sure we have a proper compensation system for Australian writers. The report states a recommendation to review programs to ensure authors are being properly compensated for income lost through free multiple uses of their books in public and education lending libraries. That's about making sure that when those books are popular in libraries, the artists and writers are paid for that popularity. We want to connect international visitors with our local arts, a tourism resource for artistic events across Australia. Another one, which won't cost the government a cent, it might cost a little bit of their pride, would be simply to put arts back in the title of the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications, recognising that arts is an essential part of that department's work. We've spoken a lot this week about the Productivity Commission and what the Deputy Prime Minister does with the Productivity Commission's reports. Nonetheless, we have recommended that the Commonwealth Government direct the Productivity Commission to inquire into the legislative arrangements which will govern funding of artistic programs and activities. And the other recommendation that I think is very worthy of noting in this place is making sure that music is affordable for all Australian students, that the Office of the Arts should establish a music access assistance program to make it easier for students from low-income backgrounds, regional backgrounds, to pursue their musical talents. In the minute left to me, Deputy Speaker, I'll just say opposition members did note that in any future wage subsidy design, we need to consult with the arts sector. We said there needs to be an insurance scheme for the events sector. We noted that we need to properly and fully fund the ABC. We need to remove the efficiency dividend from the national collecting institutions, properly fund the Australia Council, and support and help grow Australia's gaming sector. I want to thank my fellow members of the committee, including the chairs, the member for Lyne and the member for Mallee, the deputy chairs, the member for Chifley and then the member for Dobell, and my colleague, the member for McNamara, who's a strong supporter of the arts industry. I want to thank all of the arts organisations that gave evidence. 352 submissions. I particularly thank those who submitted from Western Australia. The Kimberley Aboriginal Law Cultural Centre, Perth Festival, Perth Institute of Contemporary Arts, City of Perth, Audio Technic, Barking Gecko Theatre, West Australian Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries, Chamber of Arts and Culture, Western Australia, Writing Western Australia, and with that, I commend the report to the House.
I'll give the call to the member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Chair. Mr Deputy Chair, I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
I second the motion.
The member for Barker needs to move that the debate be adjourned.
I move that the debate be adjourned.
Is the motion seconded?
I second the motion.
I'll put the question that the motion moved by the member for Barker be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I move the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
And is it seconded?
I second the motion.
Member Wills seconded. I call the member for Fenner.
Just months away from the federal election, the Liberals have decided they want to change the rules to make it harder to vote. By requiring that voters present identification at the ballot box, the government would disenfranchise thousands of Australians. Who will their bill hit? The poor, the homeless, Indigenous people, older people who've given up their driving licences, people who can't wait in the long lines that will result. They don't like what people have to say, so they're making it harder for them to say it. If you can't stuff the ballot box, tell disadvantaged voters to stuff off. Yet Australian Election Commissioner Tom Rogers said this week that evidence of multiple voting to date is vanishingly small. There were just 19 verified instances of double voting at the last election out of 14 million votes. It's almost literally a 1 in a million issue. Most of these were accidents, not fraud. No one was prosecuted for multiple voting. Homelessness Australia Chair Jenny Smith said, if you flee your home without your papers to escape violence or have your documents stolen while sleeping in the street, you shouldn't lose your ability to vote. There's a long history in this country of denying Indigenous Australians the right to vote. In 1961, the House of Representatives Select Committee on Voting Rights of Aborigines estimated that 30,000 Aboriginal people had been denied the vote. The next year, the Commonwealth Electoral Act granted all Aboriginal people the option to enrol and vote in federal elections. But not until 1984 did enrolling to vote in federal elections be made compulsory for Indigenous Australians. And even today, Indigenous voting rates may be as low as 50%. Yet the government's bill threatens to make this worse. As the Australian Human Rights Commission points out, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people often do not possess a birth certificate and face difficulties obtaining subsequent formal identification. This is a racist measure. And even if you think we need to change the rules, you don't do it just before kick-off. That's why the manager of opposition business has moved that it be put off until 2023, well after the next election. The Liberals' attacks on democracy aren't even original. They're straight out of the US Republican playbook. As former Senator Jim DeMint once said, voter ID laws are something we're working on all over the country, because in the states where they do have voter ID laws, you've seen actually elections begin to change towards more conservative candidates. Since Donald Trump's 2020 election loss, Republicans have been trying to pass voter ID laws, as well as restricting early voting and mail-in voting. They falsely claim that voter fraud is a major problem. So it's no surprise that our Trump-light Prime Minister has picked up on this. Let's not forget this is the same leader who spoke at a Trump rally and who is the only major world leader not to condemn the 6th of January Capitol riots. The Liberals have form on voter suppression. Former Senator Nick Minchin wanted to scrap compulsory voting. I'm sure plenty of his colleagues today would do it in a heartbeat if they thought they could get away with it. Another insidious tactic is their go slow on citizenship applications. At the time of the last election, there were over 200,000 people denied the chance to vote because their citizenship applications hadn't been processed. It's sadly unsurprising from a government that's presided over sports frauds, which pork-barrelled funding to projects judged unsuitable while denying it to higher-ranked projects. It's not surprising from a government that ran car park rorts, which gave money to 47 projects, mostly in coalition electorates, none of which were proposed by the Infrastructure Department. It's not surprising from a government that ran a regional grants program that gave 90% of the money to coalition and marginal seats, for a government that stacked the Administrative Appeals Tribunal with Liberal mates and given $20 billion of JobKeeper to firms with rising revenue. It's not surprising for a government that's trying to get rid of charities involved in public activism, pushing through new deregistration powers that Tim Costello has compared to Vladimir Putin's Russia. And it's not surprising from a government that promised a National Integrity Commission over 3 years ago and is yet to deliver, because they know that a robust Integrity Commission would be after their dodgy ministers quicker than Eliud Kipchoge running for the finishing line. The Liberals don't like public education, they don't like public health, they don't like public services. And now we've learned they just don't like the public.
I call the member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise today to update the chamber on how the $2.5 billion local roads and community infrastructure program is helping the economy of my electorate of O'Connor recover from the pandemic. This transformative program directly funds local governments to deliver a wide range of projects advanced by their communities. The program is especially benefiting the people of O'Connor because after the recent West Australian redistribution, the division now houses more local governments than any other electorate nationwide. All up, there's now a remarkable 57 local governments in O'Connor, ranging from Wiluna in the WA goldfields down to Nannup in the state southwest. Every one of those local governments will receive funding under Phase 3 of the highly successful Local Roads and Community Infrastructure program announced in this year's budget. The aim of Phase 3, worth $1 billion Australia-wide, is to support jobs and local economies help bounce back from COVID-19. Phase 3 recognises the critical role of local governments as the closest tier to the people in accelerating Australia's recovery from the pandemic. My vast electorate spans 5 of West Australia's 9 regions. In the 30 Wheatbelt region shires of O'Connor, Phase 3 is distributing $28.7 million to those local shires. The Wheatbelt, as its name implies, is the home to 4,200 mostly family-run farming properties. West Australia produces 1/3 of Australia's wheat and more than 40% of its wheat exports. And in 2018-19, the value of WA wheat production was $3.4 billion. and we're looking down the barrel of another magnificent season this year, Deputy Speaker. From those stats, it's easy to see why building economic resilience in the community is a national priority. One example of local roads and community infrastructure program is doing more than just that is in the Shire of Bruce Rock. Bruce Rock lies in the heart of the wheat belt and is returning to my electorate following the WA redistribution. I visited Bruce Rock recently and Shire President Stephen Strange told me their town supermarket had burnt to the ground during WA's first COVID-19 lockdown. With nobody able to travel and the nearest grocery store more than 50 kilometres away, the Bruce Rock community banded together to create a pop-up supermarket in their town hall. 18 months on, the original supermarket team, Lisa and Chance, proudly showed me their town hall cum community store. The old supermarket has been demolished and the Shire plans to use its roads and local community infrastructure program to help fix this essential community service. This is a remarkable story of resilience during the COVID crisis and how many communities are using their program to keep the economies going. Turning from the wheat belt to WA's Great Southern region, another example of local roads and community infrastructure money being spent and put to good use is in the construction of Albany's Youth Challenge Park. Phase 3 of the local roads and community infrastructure program will inject $10.9 million into the Great Southern economy, with $2.4 million of that going to Albany. The Albany Youth Challenge Park has benefited from $1 million, the whole of government funding package. The brand new Challenge Park is one of the biggest skate and pump track parks in Australia. Its opening on the Queen's birthday long weekend was an astounding event for the youth of Albany. That chilly Friday night saw hundreds of kids of all age, and there were some adults there as well, descend on the park and whose surrounds are fast emerging into a multi-function youth activity centre. The Challenge Park benefited from more than $700,000 from the local roads and community infrastructure program. That funding recognised the park's position as a key piece of community infrastructure that's already providing more leisure options for young locals and visitors alike. The program leveraged $300,000 previously committed under the Morrison government's Community Health and Hospitals program. That funding, in turn, recognised the importance of safe places for young people and vigorous activity to physical and mental health. The youth of Albany are lucky to live so close to such world-class beaches and bush, but the Challenge Park provides a safe, new adventure sports option right in the middle of town. The central location is important for Albany kids and the city's tourism economy. The park's opening coincided with the Southern Peaks Mountain Bike Festival. The festival features Australia's only urban downhill mountain bike run, a breathtaking descent down the slopes of Mount Clarence through Albany's historic city centre. A good number of people, pedal-pushing thrill seekers visiting Albany for the Southern Peaks, were also seen at the Challenge Park over the long weekend, adding to Albany's reputation as an adventure hotspot. Leaving the Great Southern for now, I turn to the Goldfields Esperance region, every square kilometre of which falls within the electorate of O'Connor. I probably don't need to tell the members here that Australia is the world's second largest producer of gold, and WA accounts for almost 70% of the national production. Deputy Speaker, I'm going to run out of time, but thank you for the opportunity.
I call the member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Macarthur is a really wonderful place to live, work and learn. We're a diverse community and we're experiencing rapid growth and a lot of change. In recent years, large parcels of our previously vast agricultural lands have been transformed into some of Sydney's newer suburbs. Names like Oran Park, Gregory Hills, Willowdale just spring to mind. We have rapid change and rapid growth and plenty of challenges. Challenges that I've consistently spoken about in this chamber and pleaded with the state and federal coalition governments to address. In order to ensure these changes are sustainable, we must heavily invest in infrastructure and services that my community so desperately needs. It's not uncommon for a resident of Macarthur to commute over 2 hours each way every day to get to and from work. It's not uncommon for a resident of Macarthur to pay hundreds, even thousands of dollars every year to drive on old and extortionate toll roads. It's not uncommon for young families to have limited time together because of such long commutes. Macarthur is unfortunately experiencing some of the highest levels of mortgage stress and rental stress in the country. Increasingly, people are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet. I love my community. I've worked with the families in my community for almost 40 years. and I want to provide a voice for them. If our region's growth and change is to be sustainable, government policies must prioritise improving economic opportunity for residents across Macarthur. Local residents should not be made to spend hours of valuable family time commuting every day. We need local work and local jobs. I want our community to have access to secure and stable jobs within our community. I've spoken numerous times about how the new Western Sydney Airport could serve as a catalyst for job creation in south-western Sydney if it's properly managed. But it's not being properly managed. We don't have a rail link to the new airport for my electorate. I've made no secret of the fact that there is already a corridor preserved for this rail link, but nothing's been done about it. We need a passenger line to the new airport. We need a transport line for goods to be exported through the new airport. We must have government funding to do this. We desperately need this rail line. It's not really fair that those from the north get their rail line, but we don't get ours. Parts of Macarthur are presently receiving also very poor mobile phone coverage, very poor internet, very poor services from state and federal governments. Surely it's a no-brainer when you're rapidly expanding communities that you provide the services for them. Unfortunately, also in areas like housing affordability, government policy could institute change, but it doesn't. We must improve our housing affordability for our young families. I'd also like to see some of our local schools upgraded. Recently, I ran a campaign for a special school, Pastoral Park School, in our community that was literally falling down, leaking roofs, covered in mould, no facilities for students that were wheelchair-bound to move within the school. And it was only after this that the state government actually bulldozed the school and are building a new one. But many of our other schools are old, they lack infrastructure, they lack proper support, and it's time for change. I'd like to see upgrades of many of our local schools. Local projects supporting local jobs are also very important, and part of that includes education. I'd like to see vocational education centres in all of our high schools. It frustrates me to no end to see the coalition government pork-barrelling in other electorates, millions of dollars spent in suburbs in the North Shore for parks and pools, but nothing for my electorate, one of the most disadvantaged electorates in the country. There's ample need in Macarthur, but it's not being serviced by state and federal coalition governments. Macarthur is a region of endless opportunity. It has wonderful people. We're increasingly multicultural. We're a highly educated community. Some of our local industries are some of the most innovative in Australia. Recently, I took the opposition leader to see Deco Group, who produce coatings and membranes in a really scientifically advanced way, and they are desperately calling out for infrastructure and support for their industry. A little understanding, some desperately needed investment in long overdue infrastructure projects from government is very important. This present government is not doing enough for my rapidly expanding electorate.
Time has expired. I call the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise today to talk about a topic which my electorate of Higgins cares deeply about: climate action. As a child growing up in the town of Albury in regional Victoria in the 1970s, climate change was not something we spoke about around the dinner table or at school or heard about in the news. Over the years, however, this has changed. My family are sixth-generation winemakers in Rutherglen. As viticulturalists, they know the seasons have changed. They know the seasons are altering due to climate change. The bushfire season of 2019-2020, known as Black Summer, has changed our minds forever. Now action on climate is at the forefront of many Australians, regardless of their age or where they live. Despite Melbourne being unfortunately recorded as the most locked-down city in the world due to the COVID-19 pandemic, climate action has remained a pressing matter for those in my electorate of Higgins. As I said in my first speech in this place, action on climate is not just an environmental imperative, it's an economic imperative. More than that, we now know it's an economic inevitability as the whole world pivots through a clean energy transition. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Morrison government does not make commitments unless we can deliver them. Accordingly, Australia has met each of its international commitments, whether it's Kyoto 1 or 2. In fact, we beat our Kyoto-era targets by more than 459 million tonnes. The current updated forecasts show Australia is on track to meet and beat our 2030 Paris targets. Australia's emissions are at their lowest levels since records began in 1990. Emissions in 2020 were more than 20% lower than in 2005. Australia is leading the world in per capita uptake of rooftop solar panels. This is something worth celebrating, in fact. Not every country has our record of delivery. Since 2005, Australia has reduced our emissions faster than Canada, Japan, New Zealand and the USA. And although this is something we can be all proud about, there is more work that must be done. Australia is now committed to net zero emissions by 2050. This is a momentous decision for our country. Make no mistake, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a pivotal moment in the history of our energy. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's not enough to have a target. We need a plan. For real action on climate change, there is no quick solution, no silver bullet. We on this side recognise this. We do not make planless promises. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, along with the Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction, released Australia's long-term emissions reduction plan to deliver net zero emissions by 2050. This plan sets out the way forward, aiming to establish Australia as a leader in low emissions technology through the creation of new markets, including hydrogen, carbon farming, as well as carbon capture technology and storage. The Morrison government is committed to investing in the next generation of energy technologies that will deliver lower emissions, lower costs and more jobs. The path to net zero is not a straight line. If you look at the recent COVID-19 pandemic, you can see leapfrogs in technology are the norm for R&D. Through technology and partnering with the free market and evaluating technology development so that Australia can lead the way with clean energy technology, we will provide and develop a market for Asia-Pacific, particularly for Japan in regards to hydrogen. I believe Australia is pivoting to a new position which is about leaning into a clean energy evolution. I'm proud that we are building jobs for our future, making sure we pivot off fossil fuels and onto a clean energy future, but this will take time and we need to bring the Australian public with us. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw Australian businesses adapt in ways that had not previously been thought possible. In the same way, we'll see the entrepreneurial spirit of Australian businesses find new ways to succeed in the transition to a net zero environment. These new or expanded markets will present new opportunities for Australia, both at home and with our important trading partners. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Morrison government is clear. It's no longer about if and when we should do something. It's now about the how we do it. The world has to focus on the how. Action on climate isn't too important, not only for now, but for the future of our children and those who follow. We do not believe in avoiding the topics of how to get there. These are difficult questions, difficult solutions. The world is grappling with them, and Australia is going forward with an authentic and honest conversation with the Australian public. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
I call the member for Paterson.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Today I want to talk about a subject that's very dear to my heart, but more importantly, critical to thousands of Australian families, and that is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. As we all know, the NDIS has been life-changing for so many Australians who live with disabilities and their families. The NDIS was developed by Labor and will be protected by Labor. In the face of secret and not-so-secret attempts to whittle it away by those opposite in government. First, they complained it was underfunded at the start. Not true. Then they complained there was cost blowouts. Also not true. Then they made people submit to independent assessments to make the system fairer. Also not true. And now, thankfully, that idea has been axed by the minister, but not after a sustained campaign by Labor and disability advocates to get rid of these so-called independent assessments. And the government has finally worked out that they are not able to attack the NDIS without people being up in arms. But they're cutting people's plans, we know that for sure. They are cutting people's plans arbitrarily and saying, well, if you don't like it, go to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, a process that is costly, time-consuming and, frankly, should not be necessary at all. And we heard yesterday in Senate estimates just what is going on with the AAT. It is disgraceful. Speaker, for the past few months, my office has been inundated with requests from vulnerable people needing assistance to navigate the NDIS. People are suffering and, quite frankly, they're desperate. It's not just participants with packages that are being affected, it's coordinators and support workers who are seeing the NDIS under attack. The NDIS is supposed to be about choice and control, enabling participants to live free and meaningful lives. Speaker, their lives are losing meaning trying to navigate this terrible system. One of the many people who has contacted me about the NDIS is Sam, a mother of 4. Sam became aware of her son's disability when he was very young. At age 3, after much persistence back and forth with local doctors, her son was provided with a diagnosis of autism. Like all concerned parents, Sam started immediately looking for measures that needed to be put in place to help her son. This included critical supports such as speech therapy, support with emotional regulation and sensory processing. At age 5, her son received his first NDIS package and Sam was able to afford these vital supports. She was then able to start looking at other issues such as food aversion and access to psychologists. However, Sam said that in no time at all, the funding from the first package was exhausted. The second package she received was an increase, so that was good. She was able to access occupational therapy as well. However, to Sam's distress, at her next review, her package was cut by 60%. There was just no rhyme or reason to it. This is despite her using up most of the funding from the previous year. Sam was told she would need to choose. The choice was between supporting her son with speech pathology or supporting her son with motor skills development. They were both important, but she could not have both. In Sam's own words, she was gobsmacked, she was heartbroken. How could the NDIS possibly justify this? This is a very good question, Sam, and the government must provide you with an answer. I'm hearing over and over again the human cost of ripping away support from people with a disability. Another constituent told me her daughter's funding for speech therapy has been halved. Another has been told by their coordinator that weekly speech lessons are no benefit to a child who is deaf and has an intellectual disability. Are they joking, she asks? 2 people have said their plans have been halved. Another person has said theirs has been cut by 3/4. In her words, I've only managed to keep it together because I've got a wonderful medical professional who is trying everything they can to fix it. Another person told me, our plan last year was $25,000 and this year it's less than $5. We've only got $300 left. Speaker, this is just so distressing. It's outrageous. This is a campaign going on to cut the supports of people who need it the most. The government seems to be oblivious, or maybe they're not. Maybe they just don't care about people on the NDIS.
I call the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Over the last 10 years in representing Bennelong, I've started a number of initiatives designed to bring the community together. There have been huge successes in the past, but the last 18 months has caused disruption to them, as the last 18 months has caused disruption to many things. But I'm pleased to announce that there are a number of local initiatives starting back up as we all start to reopen and look to the future. The Bennelong Table Tennis Cup is something I'm incredibly proud of. First devised in 2010 as a way of bridging multicultural divides in schools through sport, we provided free table tennis tables to all schools through the generosity of the local company Hyundai, and in 2019 we replaced any tables that had not survived the arduous needs of schools and for their sporting infrastructure. Last year the competition was sadly cancelled, and this year we have again not been able to bring all the schools together in one place for the big event, so we're taking the lessons of 2021 and adapting the event so students can still take place. This year I'm encouraging schools to do an in-house event, and when permitted I'll be delighted to come to your school and present certificates to the winners and all those who participate. My Bennelong Village business campaign has similarly had a hiatus for the last 2 years, as promoting local businesses has been hard while they've all been shut. But now we are coming back with a vengeance. This Shop Local campaign started back in 2010, when I received a lot of feedback that the small shopping areas around Bennelong weren't bouncing back as well from the GFC as larger shopping centres were. It's fair to say that exactly the same can be said today, as many local shops are struggling with the bills after many months of lockdown. The rush of business as we reopen will be a huge benefit to many, but still we must encourage everyone to shop at our local businesses whenever possible. I'm in discussions with local chambers of commerce to see how we can supercharge this initiative, and I intend to visit as many local shopping districts as possible over the coming weeks to ensure we get the message out about the benefits of shopping locally. Also making a welcome return is the Stronger Communities program. This is the 7th round of this excellent program that enables local groups to invest in the broader community. Last year alone, we had some wonderful and inspiring applications, from new minibuses for our local mobility group, Strider, new community gardens for Epping Rotary Club, and IT equipment to help the wonderful Eastwood Chinese Senior Citizens Club. Great projects get funded through these grants, and I look forward to seeing what will be coming through this year. Grants are up to $20,000. Normally they need to be matched with funding from another source, but recognising the difficult times that many community groups are having at the moment, this requirement has sensibly been waived. To apply, please contact my office and get an application form, and make sure it gets back by 9 a.m. on the 3rd of December. It promises to be another great round. And one thing that can't be held back is the mighty Bennelong Christmas Card Challenge. Every year I conduct a Christmas card design competition for local primary schools, and this year it's on again. The competition never fails to reveal new, wonderful, original designs. The winning designs will feature on my Christmas cards this year that will be sent to many local community members and groups. Each grade per school from K to 6 is able to submit up to 2 works. The winner will be on the cover, while the 4 runner-up entries will be on the back page. Any school that wants to participate needs to submit artworks to my office by the 19th of November. I'm so glad to be able to announce that these initiatives are coming back. They are all designed to help the community and bring us all closer together. Enjoy our freedoms. I just can't think of a better time for that than right now.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 10:30 a.m. on Monday, the 22nd of November 2021.